Well, good evening. I'm Roger Gibbons, as Malcolm's just said, and I'm a member of the Herts and Middlesex Committee and a member of the European Butterflies Group and a member of that committee. This talk is very much a sort of journey, my sort of journey in late spring and summer through southeastern France, from basically from the south coast up to the Alps. Um, and the region is sort of most popularly known as PACA. For people who are not familiar with that, it actually stands for Provence, Alps, Côte d'Azur. And it started off as a journey, but actually taking my lead from Liz's talk, it turned out to be more of an adventure, as we shall see. My first problem is I can't seem to move the screen. Okay. Sorry, here we are. Yes, for anybody who's not familiar with the geography of southeastern France, this is the sort of ringed area is the area we're talking about. Pretty much PACA stretches from pretty much Marseille to Nice, and then in the coastal regions, and then up to Briançon in the Haute Alps. And it's a region which is incredibly rich for butterflies and wildlife generally. And the surprises started fairly quickly. I was we're basically in Var, in the sort of far south of France, for the second half of May and June, and then I spend the month of July in the Alps, traveling around the Alps. And we got a phone call from a friend of mine who was running a butterfly tour in Italy, just over the French border. And he said that the person who was running that tour had actually been hospitalized, and could I stand in for him? And as we were in the south of France, the journey wasn't actually too far. But he said we only had to do the first half of the week. So we said okay to that, and my wife could come too, because the hotel would be staying in had a very nice swimming pool, so she was quite keen on the idea. But this is where the surprises really first started, because we left on June the 11th, which is normally pretty warm. Most of the snow has disappeared, and in order to get to this spot in Italy where the group were assembling, we had to cross one of the mountain passes, and there are several mountain passes in this region. It's very mountainous. The main crossing area is the Col de la Lombard, and then further up there's the Col de l'Arche. But all of these, because of the heavy snow, all of these high mountain passes were unpassable. So we had to finish up going an hour easterly in order to go west, and a 3-hour journey turned into a 5.5-hour journey, just to avoid the snow-capped and the blocked mountain passes. And we effectively stayed at this group for 3 or 4 days. Everything was fine when we were there, but the manager of the hotel in Italy said that the Col de la Lombard had been opened for our return on the 14th of June. And the 2 top photographs showed what we found when we got there. And this certainly was an adventure. The snow was about 2 meters high at each side. And these high mountain passes with pretty sheer drops were covered in sort of melting snow and sleet. I have to say that certainly was the adventure part of the journey, but we managed to get back fairly safely. But just to show you what it's like normally in mid-June is this photo at the bottom here, where it's a sunny day, and that just shows you what the vegetation normally looks like at the Col de la Lombard. Just a few days in Italy, one of the good elements to this, as far as I was concerned, is a very good site for clouded Apollo, which is quite a localized species in France. You do see it from time to time, but not in great numbers, and you have to actually know where to look for it. But this spot where we were going to be for 3 days in Italy was a very good spot. So this is the very appealing clouded Apollo, a male on the left with its wings open, soaking up the sun in the slightly overcast spell, and nice and fresh. And the transparent areas on the wings are actually natural. It's not lost scales at all. That's how it is when it's fresh. And on the right is a female, which you can tell is a female from the clearly heavier markings, and it has this yellow stripe down the side of the abdomen, which I have to say may be a female only thing. I've never actually seen that on a male clouded Apollo, and it rather replicates the sort of transverse line on the larvae. Also at this site, top left, this mating pair of Burgess clouded yellows. And as you can see, the female is in front and looks absolutely immaculate. The male is below and doing a decent thing and looks a little bit worse for wear, but at least is keeping out of the shot. Burgess clouded yellow is widespread and fairly common in the Paco region and just across the border into Italy, and it's very easily very similar to and very easily confused with the pale clouded yellow, as you can see top right. It's quite easy to identify them in the field in the Paco region because pale clouded yellow doesn't fly there, but on the areas where they do fly together, they're actually impossible to separate from external features. But there's a lot talked about how to tell the difference between the two. And one of the key features, because they, like most clouded yellows, only settles with closed wings, is that for Burgess clouded yellow, the forewing margin is slightly curved, and for pale clouded yellow, it's usually straight. This is not always definitive because you can get Burgess clouded yellows with pretty straight forewing margins, but it has to be said if there's a degree of curvature, it's Burgess rather than pale. From an upper side view, which you only rarely see generally during courtship, etc., like bottom right here, this is a pale clouded yellow, and this is a courtship. You can see the male in front. This is the female, and it looks like it's rejecting the advances of the male. And the key thing here, if you get to see the upper side, is that on the hind wing, the discal spot in the middle of the hind wing for pale clouded yellow is a sort of pale orange yellow, and for Burgess it's a much deeper orange yellow. And that might sound subjective, but actually if you see them both, it's actually quite clear cut. It has to be said that Burgess clouded yellow was only identified as a separate species, I think, in 1947, and before that it was not realised that they were actually two separate species. And in fact, it's said that nearly all of the photos in books prior to that of pale clouded yellow were in fact Burgess clouded yellow. Moving back down to the Alps Maritime now, at everybody's favourite spot in the Alps Maritime near the Italian border, in the just off the Tinè Valley in the Vesuvie Valley. It's about 1,000 meters altitude at this spot. It's very well known. I think there's quite a few butterfly tours go there. And I personally visit there every year. And I think I've recorded a total of 111 species on this little track that leads down the hillside. On the left, one of the butterflies that you see here fairly regularly, although it's by no means common, is the very iconic checkered blue, which is quite a small blue. But it's very easily identifiable from the underside with this sort of rather silvery white ground colour and these beautiful big black bold spots. And the one we've got here is a female, and above is an upper side shot as it opened up in a sunny spell. It's quite difficult to tell the difference between the two sexes because it's said that the male generally has more blue scales than the female, but it has to be said that there are females with quite a good spattering of blue scales, and this one's not far off. And you have males that have very few blue scales even when they're fresh. So there is an air of overlap in the middle, but this is clearly a female. And as we were talking about checkered species here, on the right is a checkered skipper, which you can see is a male from the abdominal hair tuft. And it was also fairly clear to me that it was a male because when I saw it in the field, it was distinctly attracted to my trainers, which is a little bit worrying, but it's not really the best backdrop for a photo. And I waited until it landed on a blade of grass before I took the photo. Also at this site, I'm usually lucky and see one or two, maybe two large tortoiseshells, which is always a delight to see. And this shot top left is the large tortoiseshell that I could see head down on a tree on this track. And it always amazes me that whenever you see butterflies and they land on a tree, they nearly always head down. Head down seems to be a favourite. I don't know whether they get to look out for predators by looking down more than looking up. But I tried to get a closer photo, but I took one step nearer and it disappeared. And top right, it actually came down to the ground a little while later, and I got a shot, and it sort of proved the inevitable problem with photography is there's always a blade of grass in the way, either right across it or creating a shadow. But it's always a delight to see a large tortoiseshell. And then at the bottom, this is indeed a large tortoiseshell. I saw this a couple of years ago. I may even have shown this photo before, but all of the hind wings have pretty much disappeared and much of the fore wings. But I have to say, it landed on the ground and it was still able to fly. It wasn't exactly aerobatic, but it was able to get around and clearly had not yet given up. When I'm in France, I tend to make no distinction between butterflies that fly in the UK and butterflies that don't fly in the UK. And dingy skipper often gets not very good press, as it's really rather moth-like and rather dull. But one thing I find is in the UK, when I see dingy skippers in Maytime around Ivanhoe Beacon and the like, they all seem to be pretty much of a muchness, a sort of a brown with not a particularly great amount of contrast in the forewing markings. But in France, I find that they're extremely variable, even from the same site. And there's two examples here, which were actually taken at the same spot. And the one on the left is really quite appealing. It's obviously very fresh. And it's got quite a good contrast on the forewing markings and a nice row of submarginal dots on each wing. And on the right, a really rather much duller one with very little contrast to the markings at all. Also clearly fresh, so it's not really a result of aging. This is a spurge hawk moth caterpillar, as you probably guessed, not only from it's fairly instantly recognizable, but also from what it's on. And European spurge grows very widely across southern Var at even fairly low altitudes, around 200 meters. And there's a lot of spurge around. I've seen quite a few spurge hawk moth caterpillars because, frankly, you can't miss them. They stand out wherever you see them. And this one was clearly fully grown. This is about probably about 9 or 10 centimeters long in total. And clearly it has a defense to predators because it's making no attempt to become disguised or camouflaged onto the background. Couple of admirals here, White Admiral and the Southern White Admiral, just put alongside each other for contrast. This is White Admiral is not uncommon in France. It's one of the species that does not fly in the far southeast of France. It doesn't fly very much in the PACA region, only in the much further north in the alpine areas of the Haute Alps, but not in the far south in Var, and not in most of the Alps Maritime. And it seems to me that when I see White Admiral in France, they're much more uniformly darker than the species that you see in England, where the hindwing markings are sort of more contrasted and more ghosted. But this one's clearly a male, as you can see from its territorial pose, and it was sitting, again, best opportunity to get a good photograph is when there's a slightly overcast spell and they sit still and soak up the maximum amount of the sun's rays. On the right is the species that effectively supplants the White Admiral in the PACA region, the Southern White Admiral. And although the Southern White Admiral does extend quite a long way further north, I think some way further north than Lyon, so they do overlap considerably. And this on the right here is a mating pair. And the venecid species are usually really quite secretive when they're mating, because obviously during mating they're static and they are at risk of attack from predators. And they tend to be quite secretive. I don't think I've ever seen southern white admirals actually mating before. So this is quite a lucky opportunity. And the one you can see opening up at the top, as is usually the case, is the female. It's much larger, significantly larger, and less sort of bluish, this bluish sheen than the male. But again, the female opening up here to absorb the sun's rays. Still on the subject of admirals, where the white admiral and the southern white admiral are clearly admirals, and when you see the underside shots left and right here, you can see that they're very closely related. They've both got this very strong white band and very similar undersides. But I've included these here because the poplar admiral, which is the third of the genus Limonitis that flies in France and in Europe. The poplar admiral is a very large butterfly. It's larger than a purple emperor, and it looks very different from the upper side to the white admiral and the southern white admiral. But actually, when you see the underside, you can see the similarity in the underside patterns on the hind wing, and you can see why they're actually all part of the same genus. Continuing the journey now, we're heading north into the Alps. We're starting the Alpine journey, and the first stop is at the very well-known Col de Vars in the Haute Alps. This is at an altitude of about 2,100 meters. It's a very popular spot with cyclists and motorbikers, and in fact, right at the top, it's really quite flat at the col, and there's a very nice cafe restaurant there, which does an extremely good trade, I have to say. And but the surprising thing here is that top left and the middle are two marsh fritillaries, which I saw on the 2nd of July at the Col de Vars, and they were both flying together, very different. But the surprising thing is, marsh fritillary is normally a very early season butterfly, and it's really surprising to see on the 2nd of July, even at this altitude, still very fresh indeed. And the one on the left, I would say, is relatively normal. The one in the middle is much darker. This is often a clinal effect, this sort of darkness and the increased black markings. But I think this is of the form or subspecies Glacigenita of the high altitudes. And I wonder sometimes if this is maybe the result of a 2-year cycle, that it didn't emerge last year and it just overwintered through one winter and emerged the following spring. Just to complete the picture of this rather incredibly variable species, I think almost like no other, is top right is a female from the UK, which I took a couple of years ago at the well-known site in Lincolnshire, Chambers Farm Wood, which shows a sort of typical pattern of the UK marsh fritillaries, and with this sort of contrasting colour markings. And the bottom, there are 2 examples of the form provençalis, which occurs in the south of Var, where in May it can emerge in pretty huge numbers. And these are both of the form provençalis, but as you can see, very different in terms of their markings, but very appealing species. And just to complete the package, there's a form that flies in Spain and in the Pyrenees, and so also just about flies on the French side of the Pyrenees. The form or the subspecies Beckery, which is indeed a sort of very deep red. So it's a phenomenally variable species, but and obviously the name marsh fritillary given to it by the early entomologists is really rather misleading, because it doesn't, certainly in France, it doesn't have to do much with marshes at all. But it's probably the case that the marsh fritillary is a better name than what it was originally called, which was greasy fritillary. So I think it's quite fortunate that we don't have to call it greasy fritillary anymore. moving further north now, we're into Savoie, and the reason we're here is that this is a site for the very scarce and very localized Asian fritillary, which only flies at a limited number of sites at high altitude in France, and it only flies in Savoie. And so basically, I wanted to get to this particular spot. This is actually on the 4th of July. I borrowed these photos from the internet. It has to be said, these are not my photos, because it tends to be an early emerger. And I've been there in the second week in July, and there've been Asian fritillaries flying there, not in great numbers, but showing a little bit signs of wear in the second week. So I thought it'd be a good idea to get there around the 4th of July and hopefully see them when they were fresh. But one of the problems is that in order to make this journey from the Hautes Alps into Savoie, this being the Alps, there are a limited number of routes by which you can get there, a little bit like the journey that I had into Italy earlier this year. And you can go, one of the obvious way through France is going through the Col de Galibier, which is about just over 2,600. It's not a road I particularly like because there are sheer drops and it's not particularly wide. It's a favourite on the Tour de France, but also it's an incredibly tortuous route. Takes quite a long time to get across. The road's very, very windy. But the alternative from around Briançon is to go through the Frejus tunnel through Italy, and this is a very short tunnel. It's only about 13 kilometers long, but it does take you right through the Alps, and it's much quicker. But I have to say that the cost, one-way trip, is 50 euros, which I think is exorbitant for a 13 kilometer tunnel. However, that's what I chose to do. Having done this a couple of years earlier, I was fairly sure how to get to the town of Modane at the other side once having crossed through Italy. And I was pretty sure that I could remember, but I have to say that what I remembered is when you come out of the tunnel, head for Turin, and I thought I could wing it from there. And clearly, when I got down the motorway, some distance, I came to a péage, the tolls, and this clearly wasn't right. And I pulled over and spoke to one of the Italian operatives, and he said, sorry, there's no way you can do a U-turn here. It's completely barriered. You have to go through the toll, 15 kilometers to the next turning, come off there, come back again, go through the toll. And I have to say, I'm not going to make that mistake again. But so eventually I got to this area where the Asian fritillaries fly. And the bottom photograph shows this area of Alpenrose on the left. And that's the area where they pretty much glued to, even though Alpenrose is not the larval host plant. I think Asian fritillary uses blue honeysuckle, I think, as the larval host plant. And I didn't manage to find that anywhere, but presumably it's lurking somewhere. And as you can see from the track here, very popular with randonneurs and with cyclists. And the bizarre thing, one of the big surprises, and these are four of the Asian fritillaries I saw there, is that as you can see, they're on the ground, on the track, males taking salts. And the bizarre thing is that where I previously have only seen, 4 or 5 at most, nearly always males, occasionally a female. This year, it was the commonest butterfly on this track, and I counted a total of 15, and they were all perfectly fresh. So I really did get the photo opportunity. But as you can see, they vary enormously, even at this one site. I mean, top left has the sort of slightly contrasted markings between the sort of yellow, orange and the red, and right down to the bottom right, which is almost completely red. And Asian fritillary is the high altitude sort of close cousin of the scarce fritillary, which is the lowland version. And I have to say, scarce fritillary has the same degree of variation in its markings. But because these Asian fritillaries were on the ground, taking salts from the ground, and it was popular with randonneurs and with cyclists, one of the problems, especially with cyclists, is that they tend to be pretty quick. And I finished up on several occasions having to sort of protect a butterfly on the ground from being run over by cyclists by sort of shielding it. Um, and obviously taking photographs, you get a lot of conversations. A lot of people stop and say, what are you photographing? Because randonneurs are basically very interested in all the wildlife. And so I must have had about 10 or 15 conversations with various people. One or two of them were quite interesting. An old couple were fascinated by the Asian fritillary and listened intently. And then they told me all about these carnivorous buttercups they'd seen. So I nodded politely and went along with this. And I thought, well, if there are carnivorous buttercups, I have to say I've never heard of them, but maybe that's something I've yet to discover. A few burnets here, and the burnets are the genus Zygaenidae. The French love their burnets. The French lepidopterists love their burnets. Every French book on butterflies has a section on burnets, even though they're technically not butterflies. And they like them much more than they like Piergus grizzled skippers, I think because they're more colourful. And so I've rather caught this. I've rather been infected with this enthusiasm for this particular genus. And over the last few years, I've started to take photographs wherever I've seen them. And I think there's something like maybe 30, even 35 or so different species in France. I think in the UK, as far as I can recall, we really only ever saw 5-spot and 6-spot burnets, but I'm sure there are other species as well. But these are some that are not particularly well known in the UK. At the top left is this Zygaena purpuralis, which is called the transparent burnet. And I have to say, I picked up these names by looking at what Wikipedia says they're called in English, but it's still a bit of a mystery as to why they got these English names. But this purpuralis has this very nice long red streak, and I sort of took this photo in Gavarnie in the Pyrenees on the Spanish border, and as far as I can see, it only occurs in the UK in certain Scottish Isles, and in the middle, even more inappropriately named, the New Forest burnet, because I think it did allegedly occur in the UK, but became extinct in the New Forest around 100 years ago, and I don't think it's found anywhere else in the UK ever since. This may just have been misidentification, but I took this particular photo, as you can see, inevitably on scabious. Where did I take this? It was yes, in the Pyrenees at an altitude of about 2,000 meters. Top right. Another puzzling name, Zygaena ephialtes, which is the billowing burnet. And I couldn't actually see it doing a lot of billowing, but it's quite easily to identify because the marks are white and they're quite clear. And on the bottom row, Occitanica, which is called the Provence burnet. This indeed is quite well named because it does fly in Provence. This was in the north of Var at about 900 meters altitude. And in the middle, discrete burnet. Quite what's discrete about it, again, is a mystery, nevadensis. But this was a photograph I took on the Col de Puymaron on the Spanish border. And again, it looks rather like purpuralis, but has some sort of distinguishing features. And bottom right, the very appealing Zygaena fausta. Again, chalk burnet. I can't see what's chalky about it, but that was taken in Mons in northern Var, again about 1,000 meters altitude, and it doesn't fly in the UK, which is rather a bit of a pity. Moving on north now, in the Alps, we're in the region called Champsaur, and this is a lesser purple emperor. The one top left is the photo that I took this year, and it's taking salts from something. I couldn't quite identify what it was, but clearly was appealing to the butterfly. And you can tell this is of the nominate form because there are two forms: the nominate form top and bottom here, and the form bottom right, Clytie, which has little or no blue scales at all, and the underside is also much lighter and more orangey on the underside. So you can tell them from either surface. But the lesser purple emperor, relatively widespread, much more frequently found than the purple emperor in France. It's only slightly smaller, and it tends to be rather bluer than purple. And from an upper side view, if there's no certainty, the lesser purple emperor has this eye spot on the forewing, which, if I remember correctly, the purple emperor doesn't have, so they're quite easy to tell apart on the ground. And just to complete the picture, there's one at the top here, which is we're staying. My cousin lives in the Dordogne, and we were staying with them a few years ago, and my cousin, husband had changed the tractor tire on the sit-on mower, and this obviously had some glue left on it, because you can see the lesser purple emperor is obviously taking something from that rim that looks like dried out glue. Moving north now into the Hautes Alps, there are some roads which lead off. The main roads are very busy, especially around the ski areas, but there are some roads that lead off which are very little known, and quite a few of them actually lead to absolutely nowhere. They're a complete dead end, which is very good because it means there's no through traffic and there's relatively little disturbance, and that means that the butterflies and the wildlife can continue without too much damage. But this is one of the roads that leads off in the region of Briançon, and these roads probably 15 kilometers long to a dead end, and a few hamlets on the way. And this is one little hamlet. And as you can probably get the impression, where you can see the road is leading at the end, they weren't really designed for two cars to pass. And in fact, in some of these hamlets, where the houses are very close together, I had to retract my wing mirrors to get through the very narrow gap. But at least it reduces the amount of traffic. And the thing about this particular road, is that one of the surprising things about 2024, which is becoming apparent here, is that 2022 and 2023 were very, very dry years. They were very baked, and it led to sort of serious worries as to how butterflies and other wildlife was going to survive, because there's been very little rainfall. And indeed, when there is rain, quite often in September, you can go a couple of months, 2 or 3 months, almost without rain. And when the rain lands in September, it's landing on baked hard ground, so that it tends to evaporate in the heat before it can get absorbed. So there was a real danger that everything was becoming very baked. But the big surprise about 2024 is that it was completely different. The spring was very, very cool. The whole butterfly season was 2 to 3 weeks retarded, which is a bit of a surprise, because the Asian fritillaries were basically on their sort of normal timescale, although maybe less affected at high altitude. But a huge amount of water had landed, and rivers that had dried up and become sort of stony, bone-dry riverbeds had actually started to flow again. For areas where we've not seen any rivers for 10 years were actually flowing again. And on this particular road, it had become completely flooded, inundated in a day. And as you can see here, it sort of produced a layer of sort of silt, damp silt, which obviously butterflies find very appealing for puddling. And this is about 40 or 50 black-veined whites, and there were quite a lot of species in this particular part of the road which had been flooded. And in fact, I mean, there's only cars go down there probably one every 5 or 10 minutes, but clearly if the cars are travelling fast, the butterflies don't have time to get out of the way. And there were quite a big area of squash butterflies, including about 50 black-veined whites. And there was a dead poplar admiral, and a poplar admiral which had been damaged and clearly couldn't fly. And so really quite a problem, the number of butterflies that had been damaged. And I pulled the car over and started to make slow down gestures to cars coming past. They must have thought I was completely mad, but maybe it saved a few butterflies. But one of the things about this particular location, as I say, I saw two poplar admirals, which were one dead and one damaged. And I went further down the road to the location where I've been to before, very rich area with quite an interesting variety of species, such as Meleager's blue and the like. And I can see purple emperors there as well. And as I sort of spent the day down in this area, and as I meandered back slowly along this road, sort of keeping my eyes open, I saw a damp area on the side of the road, and I could see two very large dark shapes. And experience has taught me that large dark shapes are usually going to be interesting. And so I pulled the car over onto the roadside, and top left was one of the two poplar admirals. There was another there. It's not the one on the right. I'll come to that in a moment. But there was another poplar admiral which was showing some signs of wear. And I just sat there for an hour and watched these two poplar admirals hopping around on the taking salts from the ground in no particular hurry. It was, I have to say, an absolutely magical experience. And it's an incredible butterfly, poplar admiral. You don't see too many of them at all. And this one was particularly fresh. And I did actually remember this time to get a decent photograph. But I've included the one on the right, which is probably the more normal form of poplar admiral from not too far away in Isère. With this white band on the hind wing, and the one on the left, as you can see, it's got very much a vestigial band. The white is absent, and I think this is the form that's known as tremulae, with the absence of the white band. But I have to say, this photo I find made the whole journey worthwhile, even if that was all that I saw. One of the brilliant surprises. And these two brilliant blue lines at the marginal area of the hind wing and the red arches above it, I just think are, well, I've spent quite a lot of time looking at it, and probably even more time talking about it. Still in the Alps, this is a butterfly called a mountain alcon blue. And it used to be a separate species in its own right. It used to be of the Maculinea genus, large blue, etc., reclassified a few years ago as Vengaris. And so now the mountain alcon blue is a subspecies of the alcon blue, but it's the high altitude version of it. The alcon blue is a lowland version. They're closely related. Mountain alcon blue uses cross gentian, as you can see here from these two pictures at the top, and Gentiana cruciata, I think is the scientific name. And the alcon blue uses, not quite sure what the English name is. I think it's Gentiana numinanth. But whenever you see Gentiana cruciata, you quite often see a mountain alcon blue on it. The females are glued to it. They spend all of their time egg laying. And the one top right, you can see, has got the curved abdomen there and is egg laying. You can see where it's laying eggs, and you can see a couple of little white eggs there. And the one bottom left is the upper side of the one above. And it's really quite appealing, even though it's mostly black with a smattering of blue scales in the basal region. And just for comparison purposes, I've included a female large blue from high altitude, where you get, again, this extension of the black apical mark, which extends and almost obliterates the sort of characteristic black splashes on the forewing. This is also a female, and this form, high altitude form, is known as obscura. On the top left here, small blue. And small blue in the UK tends to be a lowland species, but I have to say in France, it's one of the most numerous butterflies you get at high altitude. And I've seen literally hundreds puddling together. It's nearly always seen at high altitudes and quite often in huge numbers. But the thing that strikes me, and I don't have an awful lot of experience of seeing it in the UK, what I can remember, but I think UK specimens have rather more blue scales, and most of the ones you see at high altitude have very limited number of blue scales, even though this is clearly a male. And below, I have to say, I very rarely see female small blues, very rare. You just don't see them. At altitude, the females tend to be quite secretive, and all they do is basically egg laying and stay out of the way. And this one here, as you can see, is egg laying, but I'm not quite sure what it's on. I'm not sure this is the sort of normal UK food plant. I don't think these may be buds of kidney vetch or maybe something different. But one thing you find that is UK species tend to be glued to one larval host plant, and in France they seem to be much less fussy and can use quite a wide variety. A couple of more of the appealing small butterflies from this region. Mazarine blue, which when I was young was always a name that captivated me, Mazarine, and I wondered if I'd ever see one. I have to say I've seen hundreds now. It's quite common at high altitudes and very easily identifiable by its sort of rather deep blue, appealing dark blue colour. And at the bottom, the false ilex hair streak, which, as you can see, is part of the same family, the same genus as white letter and black hair streak. And this emerges in Var at the end of May and the beginning of June. And the food plant is a species of oak. I can't remember if it's downy oak or holm oak. And it emerges in huge numbers. Sometimes you can count them in thousands. This being a talk that I'm giving, it's never going to escape without some Pyrgus grizzled skippers, which I find particularly appealing. In the UK, not a problem because there's only one grizzled skipper, Pyrgus malvi, no problems in identifying it. But in France, there are 14, and they're all very similar. They're very variable, and they often fly together, which makes identification rather difficult. And also, once these are all reasonably fresh, but once there's an element of wear, they're even more difficult. But top left, we have safflower skipper, relatively common, strong forewing white markings and the characteristic long, thin dashes, white marks on the hind wing, which are characteristic. Have I got a fly in here? Yes, I have. On the carline skipper, top right, the identifying mark is this cell spot, which is said to be C-shaped or concave. And this is a little bit of a movable feast because some of them you'll have to look fairly closely to see that they're concave. And this one, as I've circled here, is probably the most extreme example of concavity that I've seen, and leaves no doubt that that has to be carline skipper. Nothing else has a mark like that. And in the middle, at the top in the middle, the alpine grizzled skipper, which has the three markings. Have I circled them or have I? Yes, I have. These three markings, which are characteristic. No other Pyrgus species has that, but it has to be said that one at the top, if there's any wear, tends to disappear. So you really need to see them fresh to see that. It's actually quite a scarce Pyrgus at high altitude, quite a large Pyrgus. Generally don't see more than one or two every year. And bottom left is the really exciting one, if you can get excited about Pyrgus, It's the Warren's grizzled skipper, Warren being a fairly famous name in British lepidopterists. And this is the very scarce one from high altitudes. And it's much smaller than the other Pyrgus. And it has these white discrete spots, which are separated on the forewing, clear hind wing, and the forewing is rather longer and narrower than most other Pyrgus. So it can be quite hard to identify, but those features should make it clear cut. And on the bottom there on the right, the quite large Fouquier's grizzled skipper, where most of the forewing markings are quite jagged at the edges, and that's quite characteristic for this. This one hasn't, but it's clearly a Fouquier's grizzled skipper because the discal mark on the hind wing is very large and very well contrasted. Anyway, enough of Pyrgus. Moving on now to the col d'Izoard, another high col at about 2350 meters altitude. Again, very popular with cyclists and motorbikers. But the bit that's interesting to me here is you can just about see there's a track that leads to this rocky scree behind in the distance. And there are a number of species that, for reasons best known to themselves, like to fly up and down rocky scree all day. Probably the key one is sooty ringlet, which is almost jet black. But there's also peak white. And also what's shown here bottom right is the alpine grayling. And they're rather difficult to photograph. And I waited for quite a long time for this alpine grayling to come to the ground. And I took a distance shot. And I took one step nearer, and I'm sure I didn't do anything to disturb it. And it disappeared. And although I waited for an hour, it didn't come back again. But that's I think I've only ever seen about half a dozen alpine graylings in 20 years, so it was still quite special. And talking of peak white, just to complete the picture, peak white top left here, which is flies at very high altitudes. I've seen it at 2,700 meters, and the males fly non-stop looking for females, and you're quite lucky if they actually land on the ground and you get a photo opportunity. And when they do settle with wings closed, like one below, it is very distinctive with these sort of sagittate green markings, which are very characteristic. And top right, this rather damaged butterfly here is actually the only female peak white I've seen, which I saw at the Col d'Izoard this year. So I apologise for showing it here, but it's the only one I've ever seen. And bottom right is the only one of this genus that the other one of this genus that flies in front. I think there is an eastern Bath white, but no really any conclusive evidence that it ever flew at Bath. I think the only evidence is an embroidery in something like 1795, but nobody could actually prove that it was ever actually seen there, and is a very rare migrant to Britain. But I think its best year, like many others of the migrant species, was 1945, sort of subtitled The Migrant Year. Going back to moths here, going back to my first love. These are a few moths from that I've taken. Two of them are day flying. One was on in the middle, as you can see, top middle, was on a sort of moth trap at night. Top left is Anania funebris, which I think is called the white spotted sable. And I think it does occur in the UK, but it's very local. I'm sure there will be moth experts that can tell me where it might be flying. And in the middle, Catocala conversa, which I don't think has an English name. It looks quite similar to a yellow underwing, but it is very much a Mediterranean species. And top right, Pyrosta nigrata, which it also doesn't have an English name. And I believe it flies, from what I can find out, on limestone in the south of England and a few limestone areas in the northwest of England. Well, I imagine it's pretty scarce. And in the bottom, you've got the box moth, the characteristic white form, and the dark form in the middle, wreaking havoc with French horticulturalists as much as it is in Britain, this accidental introduction from Asia. And bottom right is a broad-bordered bee hawk moth, which not uncommon. You see about as many as you do hummingbird hawk moths. And I took this shot with a shutter speed of 1/1250th of a second, and it actually sort of froze the body quite well. Maybe even froze the wings too reasonably. Just to prove this is my first love. This is a photo taken in October 1955. I was given this case of moths by an elderly friend of my father's, and I was always fascinated by it when I was little, and I still have it, and I still take it out and look at it from time to time. But as you can see, garden tigers and red underwings were pretty common then. A few other species. Top left here is the nominate form of speckled wood, much different to the form we're familiar with in England, which is actually the subspecies Tiercis. And this is clearly a female, as you can see from the abdomen. And with these rather appealing or yellow-orange markings, and you actually see it in flight. It looks more like a fritillary. Below that, a twin spot fritillary of the genus Brenthis, which there's no members of this in the UK, although it does look very similar to a pearl-bordered fritillary. And this is a freshly emerged male, again in the head-down pose, which many butterflies seem to prefer. At the top is a brown hair streak. It's only the second time I've ever seen brown hair streak in the UK, and I saw this in early August last year at Otmore RSPB. And this is about the freshest one I've ever seen. And this was on an umbellifer at about 2 meters height. And this is the best shot I could get from a distance. And I was patiently waiting to see if it might come down to a bit lower where I could get a better shot. And I'm afraid a photographer who saw what I was photographing came up and planted his camera right in front of it and disturbed it, and it disappeared, not to be seen again. And I have to say I was not impressed. And on the bottom here, large copper. And large copper is very much threatened in France, as has been the problem in the UK. It became distinct quite a long time ago, despite the one attempt to reintroduce it. And I was taken to a site in near Lyon, where it was an excavation site, a gravel excavation site on a private site. And I was taken there, and I was accompanied, and had to wear a yellow high-vis jacket. And because they were these gravel pits, many of them were water-filled, I had to sign something that attested that I could swim, so that absolved them from any claims. And it was a historical site where large copper had been recorded years before, and this has been really the first attempt to find out if it still continued there. And in fact, we did see this female, which looks like it's clearly emerged from the white fringes, and we did see several males. So given that it did continue there, I could actually crack a joke in French if you have a smattering of French, that given that its name is Lycaena dispar, I could say that dispar n'a pas disparu, and the French word for disappeared is the same as dispar with a U on the end. And I have to say the French did find this rather funny, which was at least they understood what I was saying. That was the end of the Alpine trip, and Lyon was heading back north, and we come back south in the beginning of September, when the butterflies are still pretty good. This area on the border between the Alps, the Bouches du Rhône and Var, which is a very rich area. And in early September, there's this little spot of savoury, which is very popular. And this is a female baton blue here. Looks, the only thing, as I say, it looks similar to is the checkered blue. And on the right, a female long-tailed blue, which seems to be a regular visitor now to the south coast of Britain. And just to round off, just a couple more slides. I can never resist taking a photograph of swallowtail. It's always an amazing butterfly, especially when it's fresh, and it always seems to look fresh when it's on the ground with its wings open. And this was a group of four taking salts from the ground. And the one on the right is very politely has closed its wings and allowing quite a nice view of the underside, which you don't often get to see. And this is the final slide. And this is on our trip back down to the south of France at the end of August. And it's 237 mainland species in France. And up to the summer of this year, I'd got up to 236. And water ringlet was the only species that had eluded me, basically because it's an August species and I'm never in the right place at the right time. But we made this diversion down to the Col de la Fosile on the near the Swiss border. This isn't me walking up, I hasten to add. I was one of the lazy ones that took the cable car up to the top, where a number of water ringlets were flying pretty much non-stop, clearly a little bit past their best. And this is about the only shot where one actually stopped and I could get a decent photo. And when we returned to Var, our Dutch neighbours are always very interested in asking me how many did I see in the summer and have I added to the total number of species. Did I get to see number 237? And I was able to say, yes, I did. And here's a photo. And they looked at it, but I have to say the look on their faces was, you got excited about this? And they learnt a new word, tatty. But I have to say, if it's your 237th life tick, it is not tatty. And that's the last slide. Thank you very much. Back to you, Malcolm.
Great. Well, thanks, Roger. That's fantastic talk as always. We have got a little bit of time for questions, but just before we get on to that, while you're having a think, I just wanted to say that we've got another talk coming up on Wednesday, the 26th of March, where Andrew Wood will be talking to us about the butterfly trends in Herts and Middlesex, but particular reference to the last 10 years since his book was published. Hopefully, all members will have received their annual report this week, which gives loads of information about all the butterfly trends in the last year. But Andrew will be putting that into a longer context and talking about how things are going over a 10-year period, which I think will be really interesting. So that's 26th of March. And the other date, just for your diary, is Saturday, the 12th of April, which will be our face-to-face Members' Day meeting at Greenwood Park in Chiswell Green near St Albans. It details will be coming out soon, but it's our once a year chance to all get together as a branch. So we really look forward to seeing some of you and meeting some of our new members then. Um, right, okay, we've got a few comments in the chat, which mostly are showing appreciation of Roger, which is brilliant. If anyone has got a question mark, a question, then do feel free to unmute and ask it, or put it in the chat if you can't do that. I think there was a question actually I did spot in there, which I might find it again. Yeah, from Lucy. So Lucy's saying, Roger, the Spurge hawk moth caterpillar is very striking. Is it poisonous to humans like the sap of the plant?
Well, I think it. I mean, as I said, I think it probably deters predators because its markings clearly say to predators that it is poisonous because it makes no attempt to camouflage itself and it actually feeds during the day. So clearly, that its markings are its warning to predators.
No. Okay. And then Alex Large is asking, if you could choose one month and one area in the south of France, what would that combination be?
You mean where to go to see butterflies?
I'm guessing so, yeah.
Well, the Alps Maritime and the Hautes Alps, anywhere around the Alps Maritime, the Tinné Valley, the Vesubie Valley is very rich, and you'll see quite a lot of species almost anywhere you go around there. Um, it's as always, there are going to be hotspots, which, as I say, this one area that I mentioned, which where I've recorded 111 species. But there are areas where you can go, and I investigate areas that I've never been to before. And sometimes you just think, well, butterflies don't seem to be interested, even though it's sort of quite flowery. That some are disappointing and some are incredibly good. But the area in the I would say in the Alps de Haute Provence, around there's a town which I will spell Beuil. Anywhere around that town, it's at about 1,500 meters. There are some very rich flower meadows, and you're pretty much guaranteed to see a lot of species there.
Brilliant. Thank you. Right. I don't know if anyone else has got any questions. I was while you were talking, I looked up Pyrausta nigrata, which has got an English name, which is wavy barred sable. Like most English names, I think probably not particularly well used. Alex is asking for confirmation. Was it Vesumi Valley, spelt Vesumi?
No, Vesubie, Vesubie.
Vesubi.
And basically the road that goes from Nice and goes north, um, almost anywhere around there. This is the Tinné Valley, up around Isola village and up towards Isola 2000, all very rich. But the Vesubie Valley is a turn off towards San Martin Vesubie, towards the Italian border. And anywhere around on that road will be quite rich.
Brilliant. Okay, well, I'm thinking I might head over to France at some stage this summer. So I'm hoping the butterflies will be out. Good. Well, if there's no more questions, I know Hillary's appeared on the. Did you want to ask a question, Hillary?
No, really, just to say thank you for a very interesting evening.
Brilliant. Okay, great. Well, thanks for everyone that's joined. It's good to know you're listening, and hope to see you either next time or at Members Day. Thanks very much, Roger.
Thank you so much.
Cheers.
Bye. Thanks a lot.